Can you tell us about what do you do? What is your expertise? What are you known for?
I wrote a book called Biomimicry, in which I looked at, did a survey around the world of people who are looking to the natural world for inspiration, for new inventions, new ways of powering ourselves and housing ourselves and growing our food, all by looking to the natural world for the designs and strategies that have worked for 3.8 billion years.
Can you tell us what inspired you about the field? Like, how did you end up here?
I would wait.
Yeah. But what I'm doing these days, after writing the book, people, the book was about people who, are looking at leaves to come up with a new solar cell, new kind of solar cell, or looking at the prairie to come up with a new kind of agriculture that doesn't bleed soil, doesn't need fertilizers, pesticides. People looking at following apes and primates around the jungle to see how they medicate themselves. People looking at our own brain and how it works to come up with a new kind of computer. And it was mostly research that I was reporting on. And then when the book came out, the phone started to ring. And people said, the companies that were trying to start to move towards more sustainable products and better chemicals, better chemistry, more sustainable manufacturing, they called and said, we'd like to do biomimicry in real time. So nowadays, I work with a group of biologists, and we're biologists at the design table. So we actually sit with designers and engineers and architects. And when they are trying to design a new filtration device that takes salt out of water, we talk about the nasal glands of seabirds and mangroves and how sea turtles live on fresh water but live in salt water. We talk about how life works, and the designers listen and say, wow, there's a new way to do this. So that's what Biomimicry Guild is doing these days.
Can you tell us what the basic principles of biomimicry are?
Sure. It's the core idea of biomimicry is that life's been on Earth for 3.8 billion years. And in that time, life has learned what works and what's appropriate here and what lasts here. And the idea is that perhaps we should be looking at these mentors, at these biological elders. They have figured out how to create a sustainable world. So rather than inventing it from scratch, why don't we take our cues from them? These are earth-savvy adaptations. They're the consummate life. These organisms are the consummate engineers. They're the consummate chemists and technologists. They've learned how to do it in context. So that's the core idea behind biomimicry, is that the best ideas might not be ours. They might already have been invented.
What are the mysteries that life has to reveal to us?
Oh, mysteries. I love that word, mystery.
Are there basic lessons that you come across?
Yeah, absolutely. There's 30 to 100 million species, perhaps more, but in this incredible variety, there is a hidden unity. There are operating instructions. There's life runs on sunlight. Life runs on current sunlight, except for some communities that live in near the sulfur vents. Life runs on current sunlight. We run on ancient photosynthesis and fossil fuels. Life does chemistry in water. We do chemistry in what's called organic solvents, sulfuric acids, and we don't do most of our chemistry in water. Life depends on local expertise. Life sees abundance everywhere, and what's abundant is golden. It's much better to shop right where you are and use the least amount of energy for an organism than have to travel far to get what you want. So life really demands that, organisms know their places, know the opportunities and the limits that are there. Life relies on diversity, banks on diversity, really. Life rewards cooperation. That's how systems, make the most of where they are and create more and more opportunities for life is by hooking up in mutualisms and symbioses. I know that we are nature. Our technologies are natural because we're a biological organism. So our cars and our B-52 bombers and our highway system, those are natural. The question is, how well adapted are they? With any, life's other non-human nature, the rest of nature is always coming up with new technologies. A robin's nest is an artifact. It's a tool for living. It's a technology. And year after year, generation after generation, natural selection looks at that artifact and says, how will the chicks fare here? If that robin's nest is made of toxic material, the chicks won't do well. And that technology will be judged to be maladapted. And so will our technologies. And so one of the things that biomimicry, I think, might help us to do is move towards designs and strategies that are better adapted for life on Earth over the long haul. So when I talk about nature, learning from nature, I guess I'm saying, as David Abrams says, more than human nature. I'm talking about our elders. We are, Homo sapiens sapiens is an incredibly young species. We don't think of that, but we are. We came very late in the calendar year of the Earth. If the Earth calendar, where it started in January 1 and now we're December 31st. We got here 15 minutes before midnight on December 31st, and all of recorded history has blinked by in the last 60 seconds. Life, the blue-greens, got here in March of that year. So they've been practicing how to live here. And so while we, of course we are nature, we're a very young species, and perhaps the best stance for us as a young species is to be an apprentice to the masters.
Toward the end, we might want to go through the 9 biomimicry things. But
and I'd have to...
Wait, because I have another question.
Okay.
I'd love to get on camera.
Okay.
Which is, can you describe for us, back to sunlight, current sunlight?
Yeah.
Can you describe for us what photosynthesis is and how sunlight is turned into life?
Oh my goodness. Okay. It's an incredibly, exquisitely complex system. But basically, there's a photosynthetic reaction center. And it's this place in every leaf and every blue-green algae and every fern and frond out there has a photosynthetic reaction center. And a light comes in, and it's what it does is it's lassoed by some molecules in this beautiful sort of wishbone-shaped molecule. And what happens is it excites those molecules, and it sends an electron to one side of the membrane of a cell, and a positive charge, a negative charge to one end, and a positive charge to the other. So this beautiful system is hit by light, it excites an electron, it starts its moving on this cascade, and it pulls these charges apart for long enough for them to do work. Okay, for that electron to then go off and take carbon dioxide through a long series of processes, takes carbon dioxide and uses the carbon there to start to make sugars and starches. And on the other end of things, it's taking water, and there's a system that's splitting that water and splitting it into oxygen for us. I mean, talk about a great byproduct. And splitting it into hydrogen ions. So there's a lot going on. There's also an antenna system, which literally sort of funnels the sunlight down because you're trying to capture 2 photons of energy within a very short period of time to do this magic, which is turning light into life, basically. All life, except for these sulfur vent communities, is dependent on this incredible process.
Can you give us a couple of the wonderful examples of how nature does things that we should be apprentices of, like steel? I know you talk about the spider and steel, and I know there's probably many others I don't know about. To illustrate for people what biomimicry is in a very simple, what nature has to offer.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Let's see. There's. Let me think about the examples. Can I run? I'll run through several of them, and you can just pick and choose.
Absolutely.
Because this is where the fun stuff is. One of the really exciting places that we're taking our notebooks and trying to be apprentices of the natural world is in this whole realm of materials. How we make things in our industrial processes it's 180 degree different from how life makes things. Okay, so when we make a material, we do what material scientists call heat, beat, and treat. Literally, that's the name of it. If you go to a meeting with material scientists and they come up with a new material, a new synthetic material, the first question they ask each other is, what's the heat, beat, and treat? It's in our language. What's the heat, beat, and treat in this material? How high do you heat it up? How high the pressure goes, and how many chemicals? What's the chemical bath that you put it in? Now imagine an organism, us making our bones or our teeth. Imagine a spider making silk. Imagine an abalone making a shell. They can't afford to heat it up to really high temperatures or do pressures or chemical baths, so they've found a different way. I mean, look at the way we make, for instance, Kevlar, which is our toughest material. It's in flak jackets and stuff. We take petroleum, we heat it up to about 1400 degrees Fahrenheit, and we bubble it in sulfuric acid. And then we pull it out under enormous pressures. Okay? Now take the spider. This beautiful orb weaver spider is basically taking flies and crickets into the web and transforming them in water, chemistry in water in the abdomen, and then squeezing that out through one of 6 spinnerets. There's 6 different kinds of silk. Through a spinneret, a little spigot, little tiny spinning spigot, and out, this liquid, chopped up carbohydrates that it gets from its web, is then squeezed through the spinneret, and out comes this material that's 5 times stronger ounce for ounce than steel. Silently, in water, at room temp. I mean, this is master chemistry. This is the manufacturing of the future, hopefully. And there's actually people who are now trying to mimic the recipes of these organisms, not chopping them up and not domesticating them to use them to make this material, but actually trying to do it in our in our kitchens. For instance, there's the way life makes hard materials, like incredibly hard materials, like the inside of an abalone shell, okay, is this mother of pearl. It's that iridescent stuff. And it's twice as tough as our high-tech ceramics. But the way it's made is that the organism, imagine this soft-bodied organism, and it releases into the seawater proteins, three-dimensional molecules that self-assemble into templates, sheets that have charges on them. And there's calcium and carbonate in the water, and those are charged, and they start to land on these landing sites. And then the shell material, the hard material, mineralizes. It literally crystallizes out of seawater. And what you wind up with is a layered material, like a puff pastry, of the hard mineral and then a soft protein, something gooey. And when an otter takes a rock and tries to crack into that shell, it slides like a metal, And it's the bricks are in sort of a brick wall architecture so that the crack stops, it runs out of energy. Beautiful architecture, incredible manufacturing. And we're starting to learn how to mimic that. So, for instance, there's a guy named Jeff Brinker at Sandia National Labs. And he's figured out how to take a one-pot process. Basically, he has the liquefied beach sand. He's making glass. He's making optically clear glass in layers of hard and soft. And he'll dip something in this pot of the precursors of a windshield. And as he pulls it out, the liquid evaporates away, and then the materials have affinities for one another. That's what self-assembly is. The molecules set up, they layer out like oil and water layers out automatically. You don't have to add energy. It's a downhill reaction. It's the most natural thing. It's what these molecules want to do because they have affinities for one another. They jigsaw together. He winds up with hundreds to thousands of layers of optically clear glass. Silently, no heat, room temperature, and 7 times tougher than our glass. So imagine the fossil fuel savings. Life can't afford to use brute force. So that's what's exciting about biomimicry. You say to yourself, there's existence proof that there's another way to do this. Another example. I love the way when you ask life for help, you start to really change the game. I mean, there's a change in paradigm. For instance, when you want to create color, we're trying to get away from toxic paints like chromium in paints. And so we tend to just sort of play with the formula of paint. But when you ask, how does nature create color? You realize that there's a couple of different ways. There's pigments, which is the kind of chemistry that we do, but those are expensive. There's also this thing called structural color. And what structural color is it's the really brilliantly colored organisms in our environment. So it's like morpho butterflies and peacocks and iridescent beetles. And what they've done, rather than using pigment, they basically have layers. The last few layers of the wing on the butterfly, for instance, the top layers are structured in such a way that light goes through them and it bounces back and amplifies to your eye the color blue, the color yellow, the color gold. But it's not actually dyed that way. They're brown. Peacocks are brown. Bluebirds are brown. That's the only pigment they have in them. So think about a day in which we're able to do what life does, which is sort of make our products start in a liquid form with everything that you need that self-assembles, and the last few layers of this product play with light to create color to your eye. You know, they don't have to be repainted. There's not lead or chromium in the paint. Structural color's 4 times brighter than pigmented color. And it's really, and it changes our whole way of thinking about, maybe it's not a new paint we're looking for. There's another game changer. We always play with the formulation of soap, you know, detergent. It's really harmful to our aquatic systems. So we're always looking for a way out of that. So what you're really trying to do is keep the surface clean. And a lot of things in nature need to stay clean. And yet, nobody besides us is using detergents. What's happening, if you look at a leaf, for instance, that has to photosynthesize, the scientists looked at the lotus leaf because it's a symbol of purity. They finally put it under scopes about 25 years ago. Started to look at the surface, and what they realized was that the surface of the lotus leaf is covered with small bumps, and they're at a particular distance from one another. And what that means is that when dirt settles on the leaf, it doesn't adhere. It just teeters on the top of these bumps. And then water balls up, rainwater balls up on top of the bumps, and then it as it rolls off, it lifts the dirt particles off the surface. That's how leaves stay clean, so they can photosynthesize. So there's a company named Stowe that makes a building facade paint called Lotusin, and when it dries, it has the same bumpy structure, and rainwater cleans the building. So can you imagine our cars with the lotus effect? There's a fabric with the lotus effect made by Scholler. So at some point, when you think about our products as hopefully someday we'll be exchanging recipes instead of shipping products, and you'll make your products locally. You'll start with a liquid, you know, just like the spider starts with a liquid for its fiber, and the last few layers will assemble into perhaps something that can create color to your eye, like the butterfly's wing, and something that can clean itself because it has the surface characteristics of the lotus leaf. These are elegant solutions, and it comes from nature, the rest of nature, having certain limits and having to tap the power of those limits. There is power in limits, I think. You know, it's a good focusing mechanism for inventions, for creativity. You know, when you know that frame, that's why poems have the power that they do, I think. And life works within a frame. It's very realistic about its opportunities and its limits. And it dances within that frame. And what we see is the result of this incredible response to what is given here on Earth. You know, and talk about elegant design, and talk about abundance and beauty. And you know, it's not hair shirt. You know, the future I would envision, if we were to truly mimic life's genius, would be one of abundance and beauty, and certainly one of fewer regrets.
Why do you believe, since you understand biology and humanity, why do we live separate from nature? It's a myth, a very lonely myth that we've come to believe that we are not nature. We sometimes, you know, we thought we were better than nature, and now we
sometimes thinks that we're worse and that everything we touch turns to soot. And neither of those places are true, you know? We are nature. I think there are so many reasons why we've drifted away from home. One of them, I think, is that, you know, it wasn't very long ago when we were really vulnerable. And the vagaries of the natural world and the unpredictable and frightening elements, you know, of being that close to the wild landscape. Imagine, you know, suddenly achieving comfort and falling into comfort, you know, not having to be afraid every time you leave that cave mouth anymore. You know, it to a certain extent, it was what we wanted to achieve, to quell our fear. And now we have, you know, we think we've achieved that, you know. And of course we're still right in the lap. You know, we are embedded within this natural world. It no longer serves us. It's no longer very well adapted for us to believe this myth that we are separate. We're embedded in and dependent upon this natural world. And it's you know, it may be comfortable, but it's become its own source of danger. And now, as a species, if we can get back to reminding ourselves of what's best for our survival, which all species are good at, if we can let those messages in and actually feel at this point, our biological vulnerability, which is you know, we're vulnerable to something. It's an emergency of our own making. So to awaken to that and to start to feel on a cellular level, wow, when I drink this water from the tap, it really tastes bad. I think our cells are screaming out, something is wrong here, something's amiss. We are far from adapted. We are not fitting. We are not living fittedly. We are unmatched to our circumstance. And if we can let that in, as frightening at first as that will be, it will at least allow us to respond appropriately, you know, and to begin to do what species do, which is to become better matched to their new set of circumstances. Life evolves and organisms change in order to, basically it's a homecoming. It's to come back to that place of fittedness to their places, to their circumstance. We're very far from that right now. And I think the malaise we feel is knowing how out of step we are and how far from home we are. And I mean, I think we yearn to come home to this planet, but we have convinced ourselves with this myth that we don't belong here, that we're aliens in a way. What we have to remember is we're not aliens. We sprang from this earth. This is the earth we sprang from. This is the earth that gave rise to us, that gave shape to us. And we, like all species, have to find a way to fit in here on this home that's ours, but not ours alone. So it's our next step in evolution.
Could you, given the fear that drove us to be separate, has driven us to places like nanotechnology and nuclear energy, and those things are with us right now and
Yeah.
driving us to what could be
Genetically
a
modified
brink,
food.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
a brink of some kind. I wonder if you'd like to riff just on, talk about what you think about these technologies, our ability to handle them, and where that puts us in terms of survivability and how those feedback loops come back to us.
Okay. The questions in biomimicry are, what would nature do here? But another question, just as important, is what wouldn't nature do here? It's not just nature as model, it's also nature as measure. What would nature do here? What wouldn't nature do here? Why? Why not? Those last two questions are nature as mentor. That's how we learn how to learn from the rest of life. How to be an earthling, how to be a carbon-based life form on this earth, So what wouldn't nature do here is a guide for, I think, the rightness of our innovations. If it hasn't happened, for instance, transgenic engineering, moving a gene from one class of animals to another class of animals, a flounder gene into a plant. We don't see that. That's not prevalent. And that should throw up a red flag for us. There is a separation. There's a membrane there for a reason. There's that between classes of animals. Life moves. We move in what is, I think, mistakenly called genetic engineering. Amory Levin says it's not engineering. It's not that precise. But what we do in genetic engineering is we tend to move one gene, okay? And life moves genes in assemblies. They come in groups and they regulate one another. So even in those technologies that have to do with life, it seems to me that we should be looking at how life does that. It's very different. Genetically modified organisms, it's very different than natural breeding. With natural breeding, you let nature take the first cut. We do that all the time when we're selecting, for instance, a crop that we like. We plant out potatoes. We pick the one that tastes best, and we're selecting that. But in planting out those tomatoes, we let nature take the first cut. In genetically inserting a particular gene, we take a step into our own hands that I don't think we have adequate knowledge of the context in which we don't see the ecology of the genome. We don't understand that gene is part of an ecology, the genome, and that plant is part of an ecology, the field, and that field is part of an ecology, the watershed and the surrounding forests and fields. We have no way of truly predicting what will happen when our creation, how it will behave in context. And it's a grand experiment. I shouldn't call it a grand experiment. It's a monstrous experiment, I think. It's biological trespass. It is, and the possibility of the biological pollution of a really altered genome it'll make chemical pollution seem like a holiday. It's that I'm that worried about it. As far as nanotechnology, nature is nano. I think we have to be really clear about. We have a new debate, and we need very clear language about that debate. Nature is built from the bottom up. You know, your entire body is a nanoscale creation. You know, it is, because it starts at the nano level. So we have to be really clear. Are we worried about nanoparticles, particles that are a nano size, that are, we take a synthetic chemical that we don't know we don't know how it reacts, how it's in synergy with other chemicals, and we put it at a nano size. And suddenly, a chemical that we really don't know that well, the risks of, we suddenly put it at a nano size, which is a size that in which its properties become very, very different. You know, it can sink into your skin a lot easier, for instance. Having the particles free, okay, is very different than having them, like nature does, embedded in a material that builds from the bottom up. So there are lessons, I think, in the natural world about nanoscale self-assembly that have to do with how do we do nanoscale, you know, building from the bottom up in a way that is safe. One of the things is, you know, you talk about some of the major differences between our industrial processes and nature's. Terry Collins taught me this one. Life uses all the elements, okay, there's a major difference between our industrial chemistry and life's chemistry. And here's one of the differences, which Terry Collins pointed out to me, a chemist at Carnegie Mellon. We use, in synthetic chemistry, we use all the elements in the periodic table, you know, the whole periodic table, even the toxic parts. And we use very simple, brute force sort of reactions to make them, you know, hook up and bond and break apart. Life uses a subset of that periodic table, very few elements, in very elegant recipes. So all the periodic table with very crude recipes, life uses a subset with very elegant recipes. Our work as a species, I think, is to try to replace the industrial chemistry book, you know, with nature's recipe book. Not chemical by chemical, but looking at whole families of reactions. And that's one of the things, hopefully, that biomimicry can do. When our chemists say, okay, we don't want to use chlorine to do oxidation reactions anymore. We know the problems with chlorine. And then it's time to say, well, what in the natural world does oxidation reactions? Who can we learn from? And then mimic that whole family of reactions. That's a big job. It's an Apollo project worth pursuing, I think. Anyway, I don't know how I got into that.
I was talking about given now what you know about these, what is your hope about us getting this under control? I mean, are you hopeful?
Oh, these
about
technologies,
the future?
right?
Are you hopeful about our future? Are you worried?
I think the energy and the passion for this work, and I'm trying to explore as best I can the solution space with life's help. And the energy for this work and the passion for this work comes from a very clear understanding of the problem space. And you've got a choice. You've got either living in despair, coming at this out of fear, or coming at this out of love of this sweet world. And I know what we have to lose, and it's too precious to me. So I've decided to come at this out of love. And that means that I understand that we are headed into an evolutionary knothole very rapidly. And my hope, I'm keeping my mind on what we're going to do on the other side of that evolutionary knothole. As we squeeze through, splinters and all, it's going to be painful. But what are we going to bloom into on the other side? You know, and how much of this sweet world will come with us? Are we going to be a keystone species, which is a species that makes it possible, by its living, makes it possible for other species to make their livings? I hope so. I hope we learn to do that. I think I think this world is things are going to get crazy. I know things are going to get crazy. I'm following particularly the effects of climate change on species, on plants and animals. And we're seeing that at least half of wild species we can track that they are responding in some way to climate change already. While we're still debating, they're already responding. The meta-studies are showing us, for instance, in North America, that species are moving at a rate of an average of 4 miles north or up in elevation to get to cooler climes. 4 miles a decade, which doesn't sound like much, but that's an average. So there's some species like an Edith checker spot butterfly that's moving at 60 miles a year, okay, north, moving its range north. This is, and they're not doing it in lockstep. So what's happening is you have some species that are moving north or moving up in elevation, but they are what we call, and to mask the pain, we give it these sort of bland terms, decoupling. We have pollinators decoupling from their pollinated plants. We have parasites and hosts decoupling. We have predators and prey decoupling. So you might have an insect, a forest-eating insect that moves up and perhaps their predator species hasn't moved up. The ecological scrambling of species suddenly mixed together who have not, in evolutionary times, lived together. And what comes out of that, how that will be resolved, is really, we talk about sea level rise, we talk about it's going to get hotter. When we start to look at what's really going to happen to these organisms, and it's already happening. There's a native hazel in Scotland. In the last 3 years, it has bloomed 55 days earlier. It is now blooming in November. It's supposed to bloom in spring. It's blooming in November. They predict that it'll be blooming in August soon. There are birds nesting with snow falling. This is really unprecedented, and so you take that in, and you say, okay, now what? I'm interested in the now what. What do we do? Knowing that, and what we do is make our landscapes as hospitable as they possibly can be for these refugees. We begin to create corridors, north to south corridors, of fecund landscapes. We begin to literally have fertile, safe places for organisms to move through our suburbs, through our rural areas, and through our cities. We begin to learn how to enhance fertility and the capacity of life to take in these refugees, the capacity of the landscape to take in these refugees, and give them every opportunity to survive. we have to learn to do what all species have learned to do. It's nothing really new. It's a rite of passage for every species. Every species, sure, they're keeping themselves alive. I mean, their definition of success is keep yourself alive, yes, and keep your offspring alive. That's success. But it's not the offspring in this generation. It's the offspring 10,000 generations from now and more. That's really success, that your genetic material is still around. But there's no way you can take care of your offspring 10,000 you're not going to be there. So what organisms have learned to do and what systems have learned to do, and here really is the magic heart of it, they've learned that you can't take care of your offspring 10,000 generations from now, but all you can do is to take care of the place that's going to take care of your offspring. So they've learned through everything they do in the process of eating and in the process of excreting and in the process of finding a mate, they manage to build soil and cleanse the air and filter water and exhale a composition of gases that happen to be exactly the gases that we need, a cocktail of gases that we need and that life needs in order to flourish. What life has done is learn how to create conditions conducive to life. Nothing special. There's no EPA. There's nobody telling. They don't do it sometimes and not other times. It's part of the system. It's part of being an earthling. You learn how to create conditions conducive to life so that there is a place that will support your offspring. We, as biological organisms, if we can learn to do that, and I think it's going to take being nature's apprentice. I think we're going to have, we don't have time for trial and error and for trying new technologies just because we can do them. We need to look not at what can be done, but what is done. And what is done is something that we're starting to understand, how life works for miracles, how nature functions. And our world really should function like that natural world. It may not look like the natural world. Our cities may not look like rainforests, but they really do need to start to function like them. If we are to be welcome here. Okay.
We almost run out of time. You answered the question.
Okay.
The answer, your question was answered by saying life creates benefit.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely think we're going to probably be calling you. So there's 3 pages of questions here.
Okay.
The last thing, we're good. I think what we can go to now is...
I mean, the other okay, there is another one that would be maybe a unique one, and that is one of the things that's hemorrhaging right now. Besides this huge spasm of extinction of species, what's the other thing that's hemorrhaging is topsoil, and from which all wealth, it is the source of all wealth. Our wealth is imaginary without fertile topsoil. And for instance, in this country, in the United States, we've lost 1/3 of our topsoil in the last 100 years of plowing. Now that's just, that's an unacceptable recklessness, really. It's the sloughing off of the plasma of the earth, really. And when you see those plumes of soil, moving into rivers, what we're losing is a fossil resource. I mean, it's It takes a while to build soil. And it takes a while, certainly, to build a really rich soil profile. And so we really have to get our agriculture right. We need to move to not an annual agriculture, we need to move to a perennial agriculture and a mixture of species. I mean, we need to mimic a prairie, as Wes Jackson was studying. And I think we also, as we move to bio-based products, we're moving now to products that will be able to compost at the end of their lives. We really, as an economy, in our economy, we don't have a feedback loop that'll bring those carbohydrates. They're coming from the soil. That's the new wellhead. It's the new oil field. Is, for bio-based. If you're using carbohydrates that you grow as the feedstock for your plastics and for all your other products, then you're using soil fertility as your raw material. So, do we have a way to make sure that those nutrients get right back? We really have to be really good, thrifty farmers as a society. Okay.
Last question.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what we're asking everybody.
3 minutes on 2.
Okay. What would you say to future generations if this was in a time capsule? What would you like them to, just a single statement about what you know now, if they're looking at you for guidance?
Future generations. I would say that that's, oh my boy. We've lost our way, and we're hopefully, by the time, hopefully you're at a place in which we've found our way again, and that we've learned to live here and be a welcome neighbor here on Earth. If you ever lose your way again, remember that it's not technologies help, but that's not what will ultimately right you back to that place of home, being home. What will always bring you there is a respect for the other organisms with which you share the planet. I mean, respect will do far more than policy or than technology to guide your hand to right behavior. Right behavior emerges from deep respect. It's very difficult if you honestly see other organisms as mentors. It's very difficult to stand by and watch your mentor be hobbled or crippled or go extinct. So if you lose your way and you're searching for the solutions, remember that they begin with putting yourself in proper relation to the rest of the natural world.